talk tonight about our sculpture called Skew that's down on Water, Wisconsin, on sort of the west side of the Chase Bank Plaza. We were kind of asked tonight to talk a little bit about how it was made of the sculpture. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the background and kind of where the sculpture came from in our thinking, and then move into some of the process of making it, which is actually, I think, pretty interesting. Makes a pretty good picture. So we wanted to just start with this image. If any of you guys have heard us lecture about our work, you may have seen this before, because we often start our talks with this picture, because in about 2007 is when we started working with this idea of architecture and history, and working with forms that really talk about sort of place and architecture and time. So this piece we kind of refer to just as the farmhouse, and it's become a bit of a character in our work. It seems to have a bit of a personality, and we have a really hard time not using it over and over and over. So we've actually used it in various configurations in different installations. And in this particular image, the image itself is called Cloudmaker, and it's a miniature house. For any of you who haven't seen it or know about it, it's about 24 inches high, I believe, so it's about 2 feet high. And here we were on a residency in the Salt Flats outside of Wendover, Utah, and so it's photographed on the Salt Flats outside of Utah, which was kind of our whole plan for that residency, was to photograph these miniatures in really kind of otherworldly locations. So it set us off on this interesting path of thinking about history, about architecture, place, space, like I mentioned before, and then eventually starting to think about who may have inhabited these structures as well. This is a digital image of the farmhouse, but obviously a little bit strangely represented here, with another farmhouse stuck to the bottom of it. So while we were thinking about sort of the collisions of past and present, and how people of the 21st century are inhabiting buildings that were built possibly in the 1800s, and how that collision of lifestyle and what the purpose of that building was to begin with, and the idea of sort of legacy and maybe a farmstead being a place that people might return to or sort of pass down through, almost as an heirloom. That's something that we don't really think about anymore. So all of these collisions were kind of something that we were thinking about a lot. So we started to take this image of the house and start to kind of just to do things to it that felt very uncomfortable. And this is one of the images that kind of arose from those experiments.
I'll just jump in here. One of the things that's happening here that I think is going to become important when we start talking about Skew is that the kind of logic of this move where we reflected the house had a lot to do with the digital platform that we were working with. So we were working with SketchUp, a 3D modeling program that's commonly available. And in that platform, it was sort of a very simple move to reflect this house and put it upside down. It's not necessarily something we would have thought to do in the studio, but in that sort of digital environment, there's some logical moves that we're very interested in how that will translate back to physical reality.
Right, because in the digital realm, there's no space constraints, there's no gravity, so you can really think very freely. So we did end up constructing this in physical reality. So this piece is called Reaction. It's in the collection of the Chipstone Foundation right now, but this image shows it at Innovative Gallery. We won the Mary Noel Fellowship in 2008, and this is one of the pieces we built for that exhibition. Kind of moving a little bit farther into the future, this is probably just a few years ago. We started a film project where we really started to look at these sort of buildings that we were constructing in miniature, but starting to think about who might have inhabited these buildings, both from kind of a historical perspective, but also from a 21st century perspective as well. So we developed a couple of characters. So each one of us plays a character that's completely a fictional character that we just made up out of our heads, but sort of loosely based on our own ancestry, combined with how we understand history through fiction, through movies, through history, through books that we might have read, all the different means that we have right now of understanding history, kind of amalgamated, and us kind of, just developing characters that seem to make sense to us out of all of that knowledge. So here, on the left is Brent's character, kind of an unnamed character, but he's constantly involved in these activities that are very futile. He's always constructing things and kind of wrestling with the landscape or wrestling with building materials to try to construct things to make his life easier, but the struggle rarely results in anything very fruitful. He's often struggling, but he's still a survivor. He's always, he might be going through a struggle, but he always sort of comes out on the other end. Maybe with not much to show for it, but he's still plugging away. So in this particular film still, we started working on a film project that's continuing, it's ongoing, with these two characters. In this film still on the left, Brent's character has just basically pushed one of the construction walls up into place and is starting to build a house. And the image on the right shows that constructed building, which we then turned into a film set. And this is several years into that structure being, it was originally erected out on the Ripon College Prairie. They have a restoration area out there, and that's where we built the building. And this particular picture shows it several years into being out on the prairie, and you can see how the weather has started to take quite an effect on it. So it's starting to kind of shift and fall apart, and we're so interested in those processes, so we're very happy when that happens, actually. This piece also, I should just add, has had a life beyond this because it weathered a prairie burn, a burn-off that they did on that restoration area, so it's charred. It was then taken out of the prairie, reassembled at Madison Museum of Contemporary Art for the Wisconsin Triennial, and it's going to have yet another life at the Rockford Art Museum in October, so it kind of continues to survive.
Just to say that the film project we're working on is in collaboration with Tate Bucker, so I just wanted to mention it as well. This frame is also it's based on that same farmhouse. So the footprint of it is that same farmhouse that we used in the other slides that we showed you. So this is a piece of sort of character that keeps coming back to us in many different ways. One of the things when we built this piece, we were kind of looking at the time period and we said, okay, well, this would have been basically like balloon frame construction, basically using 2x4s. And so in some ways it's very similar to the way we build houses today. We're not that far removed. It's still like an available material. And I think after we did this, I wanted to, I just had a real desire to reach back a little farther. So we got interested in timber frame construction. So this is actually a piece that we did as fabricators, because we also run a business called Current Projects, where we do art fabrication and exhibition design. And so this is a piece that we fabricated for the artist Fro Wilson at the Sculpture Milwaukee. And we worked with her very closely and kind of helped design the structure itself. And this was sort of our first foray into timber frame. So this is our timber frame construction. So this is all traditional mortise and tenon joinery held together with wood pegs. So there's no glue involved, there's no metal fasteners involved. And in this case, we're using white oak. So when Mary Lou approached us about doing this project for Sculpture Milwaukee, we had, one of the things she mentioned was the timber frame project that we did with it. And we had been wanting to continue that process and sort of develop it further. So we were really considering doing a timber frame piece for Sculpture Milwaukee. And right around that time, there was a series of kind of 3 different events that kind of stacked up and somewhat serendipitously at that moment. So we were, right after Mary did the studio visit with us, we just happened to be going up to Grand Marais, Minnesota to visit Northhouse Folk School, where one of the things that they teach there is traditional timber framing. So we were going up there partly to consult with them and learn a little bit more about timber framing. At the same time, I got a text from Alec Regan, who is our longtime studio assistant, and he was at an Acre artist residency, and he happened to be building a timber frame catapult. So that's what you see on the right here, specifically designed to fling cow pies at high velocity in fields. And then I got a call from my father, who said that a tree had fallen and smashed his garage. That tree happened to be about a 36-inch wide, estimated maybe 300-year-old white pine tree. And one of the things we learned at Northhouse Folk School talking with them is that white pine is kind of considered the ideal material for timber frame because it's very easy to work and it's very sort of stable. And often with timber frame we're using material that's not dry yet, so you don't have as many problems with pine in terms of shrinkage and movement. So it seemed like all of these things were lining up at once, and we felt like doing something with timber frame was the way to go for Sculpture Milwaukee. So we convinced my father to have the tree milled. So we actually had a sawyer come out who had a portable mill, sort of this horizontal band, so I brought on a trailer, and we helped him mill the tree. And we were able to get enough material from this one single tree to do the entire sculpture. And it was also sort of like a really, this is the first time, I've been working for 25 years, and it's the first time I've gone that far back in the process. I'm just buying material from a lumberyard or a hardwood store, and then working it from there. So this was really gratifying to go all the way back in the process and actually build a tree from an actual tree. So and I learned that wood comes from trees.
So we knew that we wanted to timber frame something, and we knew we wanted to do kind of a simple shed structure. But beyond that, we weren't exactly sure about the exact form that the sculpture would take. So while we were batting around ideas, a couple of things really came to mind, and this is again from the past. So this series of images, we actually did a project a long time ago where we were kind of traveling across country, ending up in Calgary, Canada, and taking photographs on the way. And this is a photograph, I believe, from, I want to say North Dakota, maybe. But anyway, basically, a farmstead that was out on the windy plains, and this shed was just slumping in the best way. It's skewing in two directions, essentially. It's skewing both this way and this way. And we just really loved it when we saw it those many years ago. Took pictures of it, kind of filed it away. It was in our heads. I remembered that barn structure when I was teaching and teaching casting. I had, we fabricated this little version of that. So this is really a miniature. It's probably only about 6 inches high of that same skewed shed structure where it's skewed in two directions. And I sort of worked with creating a cast, a mold out of it because I was interested in casting it and maybe turning it into some sort of unit, multiples that could be built with. Nothing really came out of that except for a series of experiments. So again, this was just something that was like percolating in our heads. But eventually we ended up returning to this model. It's kind of, ever since the casting experiment, it's been just like sitting in our living room. It's like something that's just kind of off the radar, but kind of on the radar. So eventually we kind of returned to that structure and decided that this would really be an interesting structure to represent with this timber framing method. It did launch us, of course, into some very strange geometry, which Brent will talk about here.
Sure, what was kind of fascinating about this, so what was kind of fascinating about that structure was that it was, oftentimes we're dealing with this sort of collision of past and present in our work. And so on the one hand, it was referencing kind of the way that structures fail in the countryside. So, it's a sort of familiar sight to, people in the Midwest or out West who have, drive around the countryside and see these barns that are slumping in one way or another. And they find really interesting ways of sort of failing. And this is kind of, I think, one way in which those structures fail is to begin to skew like this. But the other thing that I think was really interesting about it was it had kind of a digital correlation as well, and it sort of brought us back to some of the things we were doing with reaction, where we were taking that kind of digital platform and using it to reflect the object. So we wanted to both sort of simultaneously engage with the past and do a timber frame structure that was really engaging with this sort of age-old method of building with hand-cut joinery, but also engage with the digital and kind of think about how those two things can interact with each other and how they may conflict, how they may cause interesting tensions. So rather than creating a barn structure that where all the joinery is separated, where you might see it in real life if you were to visit a family barn, we did the Skew digitally, and we translated all of the distortions that came with that to the actual timbers. So when you look at Skew, you'll see that every timber is actually a parallelogram in section, and all of the joinery is skewed, and there's sort of these interesting kind of distortions that come along with it. And we'll kind of illustrate that in a little bit when I show you more slides. So this is an image from SketchUp, which is the 3D modeling platform that we use. We were fortunate enough to find a plugin that would allow us to skew the structure and then continue to work on the upright structure, the non-skewed version of it, and make changes on that, and it would automatically apply them to the digital or to the skewed version. So that actually made the workflow on the digital end much easier and more practical. So here we are in the shop. This is actually not in our studio. This is Alec Regan's studio because he had a little bit more space to work in. So we decided to fabricate it there. And you can see with this, we're spending quite a bit of time kind of translating the digital onto the actual timber. So there's a lot of kind of digital analysis measuring on the digital file and then transferring those measurements and those angles to the actual timber. So there's that very sort of 21st century version of what we're doing, but then we're translating that to, you can see on the right, we're using hand tools to cut the joinery, kind of engaging in a very kind of antiquated way. Here you can see a couple of details of the individual pieces before they're joined, before they're actually put together. And on the left, you can kind of see how the joinery itself is also skewed. So all of the mortises and tenons are, cut at compound angles and then assembled together with the pegs. Here is when we're beginning to mock it up in the studio, and this was kind of a really interesting moment when we took these two pictures because this was sort of at a time when it was just beginning to come together, and you start to see some of the sort of visual games that Skew plays on the viewer. So if you look at the picture on the left, it appears as though both of those braces are essentially the same, right? It looks like a symmetrical layout. But if you come around to a different view of it, you can see that one of those braces is stretched and narrow, and the other one is sort of short and fat. And so what's really interesting about Skew is that as you navigate around it, the piece changes significantly, and your perception of the piece changes significantly. In fact, there's one view as you're approaching Skew going east on Wisconsin Avenue. Your first view of it, it looks like an upright structure. Like it's just a straight, normal timber frame structure. But as you drive by it, it starts to do this. So I really encourage you to take that drive at some point if you have a chance. Just to approach it going east. So one of the things we found in creating this, and this was a real challenge to create, it was definitely pushing our abilities. And there was a sort of a major learning curve for everyone involved. And there was always sort of anyone who came onto the project. We did have several people helping with this. it sort of took several days to kind of get into the Skew thing, and those first few days involved a lot of headaches. But then eventually it kind of clicks, and you start thinking in Skew, and the real world starts looking wrong. But one of the things we realized is that the standard toolkit doesn't work, right? So like a framing square, for instance, is useless because we're not using any 90-degree angles. So what we found is we had to build a lot of our own tools. So another aspect of this project is we actually ended up fabricating probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so of our own tools, which we needed in order to accomplish the project. So you see on the left is our framing square, what ended up being like a 37.1 degree angle or something like that. And then also we have several versions of this marking gauge, which has specific angles on it in order to mark out the geometry. And here's just a couple shots of Skew coming together in the studio. So this is kind of towards the end where we're putting the farm. You can see Joe Thrasher up there on the left, and is that Joe? Beth on the left, and Joe on the right. Alec Regan by the ladder there in the picture on the right. So our approach with this, though, and I have to say part of this was for the drama of it, was to create this as a kit and then disassemble the whole thing and then reassemble it on site. So this is that entire sculpture in the back of our van. So it actually came apart into 52 pieces, and then we brought it back on site and assembled it there. It's sort of an animation part. The installation went extremely smoothly. We actually had the structure built before lunchtime, so that felt pretty good. And here it is working with methods and materials and the amazing crew of art installers to lift the piece into place. The base, by the way, we fabricated, so that's one part of this we did not build. So we worked with a company called V Metals to create the base in 4 quadrants. And the base you'll see as well is also skewed, and it's kind of an important move because it helps with the illusion of the piece to kind of create some of the optical illusions. If it were straight up and down, it would kind of undermine some of the things we're trying to do with the sort of optical trickery of this piece. Sure. So this is the piece installed. See, there's a branch at the top. We did, as we're sort of trying to engage with tradition with this piece, there were a couple of sort of traditional rituals that timber framers often do when they create a piece. So the first mortise, we put a penny from this year in, and then put the 10 in, and then when we completed the structure, we hung a pine bough off of the gable as a sort of ceremonial completion of the structure. And here's a couple of other pieces of the piece after being installed. You can see that it changes quite a bit depending on your perspective.
And I'll just add one thing that's really nice about our site, I think, because it exists so close to that atrium on the Chase Bank building, is that the atrium is completely made of, a grid work that is very upright and 90 degree. So that our skewed structure is very exaggerated next to it, so it really worked out well. And this is kind of our federal image of our entire studio crew and me and Brent sitting on the sculpture in skewed fashion. Of course, we're trying to match the lean there.
So just to acknowledge those who gave us a great deal of help with this piece. I'll just point it out. Got Maggie Sanderson here and Isaac Daniel. They were interns that worked with us for this. Brock Toft, Joseph Thrasher, Alec Regan, Shana McCaw, and myself.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so I've spent most of my life either making my own sculpture, teaching others how to make sculpture, or casting and fabricating other artists' work. And as a result, like many artists of my generation, I know a lot about how stuff is made. Because of my extensive knowledge of materials, I've been honored to be the resident detective conservator for Sculpture Milwaukee. And, we do a lot of detective work. In order to reproduce, conserve, or understand how a piece of sculpture came to be, one has to understand the physical nature of the material you're looking at, be aware of the artist's intent, and be able to walk backwards through the imagined stages of the process. As an art foundry owner, one of the main things we teach our employees is how to look and understand what came before in order to faithfully reproduce the artist's work. With a little bit of observation, lots of detective work and imagining, I'll share what I discovered about the making of some of this year's sculptures. The goal of this talk is to demystify how sculpture is made by giving you some observation tools. Observation. 15 of the 20 pieces exhibited this year are made of metal. 5 of the 15 are fabrications. 10 of the 15 are metal castings. 1 aluminum, 2 stainless, and 7 bronzes. However, behind these cool objects of metal lie a world of collaboration, performance, and studio practice. I'm going to feature 2 artists who use performance and casting, Sanford Biggers and Liz Lynn, along with some of the other artists who are casting and collaborating in their studios and at the foundry to highlight the diverse practices that produce the art before it's reproduced into metal. Sanford Biggers called for Michael Brown, who shot in Ferguson, Missouri. Sanford Bigger uses sculpture painting, photography, textiles, and performance. He isn't the first artist to have used a gun in the creative process, but he may be the first to have coined it ballistically sculpted. The reason I'm showing this video is to illustrate the diverse approaches artists have to the process, and that most any process can end up in casting. Castings, particularly bronzes, come with a lot of history and baggage, and because of this it may be difficult for viewers to get beyond the material and to the content of the art. This is one reason to look at the underlying making to learn more about the artist's intent. The band pieces are part of Bigger's response to Black Lives Matter movement and an attempt to overcome what he calls historical amnesia. In a TED talk, he described the process as he collects wood sculpture, he dips them in wax, and then he takes them to a shooting range. At the shooting range, he puts them on a tripod, and the smaller pieces, like the one here, he shoots with a .22. He doesn't actually pull the trigger though. He has what my husband calls collaboration with a firearms technician. So they shoot the pieces, and then this one, if you look at it closely, you can see all the bullet holes in it, and you can see the shattering, the violence to the piece. I don't think he made editions of these. I think that he burned these out. So this is kind of an experimental stage. So he would take the wood and the wax and put it through the founding process without creating a mold and not creating an edition. And somebody can tell me if I'm wrong, because some of this stuff I'm just kind of like gleaning from my detective work. When you guys to the larger pieces, we go over to the next one. This is one that's in the exhibition without the quilt. It's called Bam's Warrior. And he also took this one to the firing range, used a larger firearm, like a 9mm shotgun, and where you see the arm piece missing and one of the legs is missing, it's kind of hard to see. Then he takes the piece back to the studio and adds more wax to it and sort of kind of mends it back together, kind of making like a healing. So when you go and look at this piece, you don't really see as much of the violence to it as the smaller pieces, which is kind of curious. But you do see, so I'm trying to figure out, okay, did he make one of these? Did he make more than one of these? You know, before I got my information sheets, there's no edition number. Usually you can tell a lot about a piece by, does it have an edition number? Does it have a foundry mark? Can you, you know, is there more than one? So I started looking at this piece just the other night, and you can see the parting lines where the molds were put together in the foundry. You can see the marks that the metal finishers made where they were trying to blend the pieces they welded together. You can see all the evidence of the foundry there. And I don't know if that was the artist's choice or if he just wasn't aware of that, but I think he's a pretty smart guy, so he's probably made that choice. Like, hey, I don't mind the marks from the foundry, I don't mind the process showing. So, anyway, I don't think it's really important for, like, piece. But there's a lot of information there. He got his MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago, and they have one of the earliest studio practice programs, and they have a top-notch foundry, and in my opinion, is one of the best in the country. And they do a lot of direct wax. They don't use molds. They force the students to learn how to handle wax and teach them how to have a casting experience through a lot of experimentation, a lot of direct contact with the material. And so I think that translates into his early work, especially where he's shooting the piece and then not really going back into it again, but just casting it raw. And these pieces on the right, I couldn't find any information on them, but those bronzes, I think, were done as one-ups with just wax because of their lacy nature, and probably wouldn't put that through a mold making process. So, I don't want to bore you with too much of that, but for some of you who are not familiar with the lost wax process, I'm going to give you a brief explanation of the process so you can better follow the discussion for the rest of the pieces. And that'll also help you when you're out there looking at castings in Sculpture Milwaukee to understand a little bit about the process. Does anybody out there know much about bronze casting or metal casting? One or two. So I'll try to do this kind of quick. So for many artists, including some of this exhibition, if the idea is complete and in the original art object, it's typically dropped off at the foundry, not to be seen by the artist until it's entering its final stages of completion, typically at the patination process. On the other hand, and it's not as common, if the artist is interested in manipulating the casting process at any of the different stages, they may be more directly involved by spending time at the foundry or taking the work back to their own studios to make changes. There are many places during the casting process that the artist can intersect, from the making and manipulating of the mold, making the mold making process, to manipulating the waxes, metal finishing, patina. If the artist is involved, it's typically because they intend each casting to be unique by their hand, or they work with the foundry artisans to make the desired changes. So like someone like Kiki Smith, who we'll talk about a little bit, she is a person who has to have her hand on every casting for a lot of her work, not all of her work, especially the older work. And where there was just a lot of add-ons and a lot of manipulation of the surface. And so that kind of what really makes it interesting is if the artist can come in and not just run an edition where some artists we never even see them. They send the drawing, they send the design, they send a cut pattern or drop off a sculpture, and we cast it, patina it, put it in a box, ship it to the gallery. Never to see the artist's involvement. So quickly, I said quickly, this is something typical in art foundry. We've got something you'd expect to see in that sort of idea of a bronze. It's an equestrian piece by Alexa King. She's one of our clients. So the artist will bring in a clay sculpture. Now, as you saw from Sanford Vickers, it can really be from any material at all. But people typically think of bronzes as being made from clay traditionally. But any material you want, you can cast into bronze. It's only material. So once the clay is brought in, we make a rubber mold. Rubber mold is for reproduction of waxes. We use the lost wax process. So for every bronze, you have to have a wax. And that's why, if you're more hands-on, you can manipulate each wax to change it, if that's something that you like to do. So in this picture, you can see that the mold is actually being disassembled. You see the clay horse. The pink is the rubber mold that's brushed on. That's what picks up the detail off the original sculpture. And then the plaster matrix is basically what the rubber keys into so it doesn't deform when you make your waxes. The wax is either brushed or poured into a mold. And so this first coat is what's going to pick up the detail from the original sculpture with what the mold is picked up. That first layer, you can see there's like a texture on the pink rubber. That's the clay marks from the hand. That'll pick up like fingertip detail. Here, the wax is being poured into the molds. Whenever possible, we pour into the molds. Waxes are hollow, bronzes are hollow. They're never solid. Unless, of course, it's a very small piece. So anytime you see a bronze, the most common question asked is it solid? No, it's not solid. They're always hollow. They're always about maybe a quarter inch thick. Okay, so the pink rubber is being pulled off of the wax here. Next is wax chasing and sectioning. Here's when the artist would come into work. In this part of the process, we clean off any defects that happen in the wax casting and get them ready to go to another mold making process, which is investment in the ceramic shell. The red wax that you see is a gating system that we use. It will eventually, once we make a mold of this, all that wax will be evacuated, and that red area will be the channels or the plumbing that will deliver the metal into the casting. These are the legs and like the rear end of the horse. Okay, so this is the investment. Now we're taking the wax and dipping it in the investment. It's similar to the rubber in that it's going to pick up all the detail off the wax. If you don't continue to have a faithful reproduction from the beginning until the end, you won't end up with what you started with. And it's very important for most artists, especially if they're not in the foundry, and even if they are in the foundry, that what they give you, you give them back. Now we got a finished investment ready for evacuating the mold. Okay, this is the mold with the wax burned out. The wax is now lost, it's gone, there's empty space in there, and a vessel to receive the metal. Similar to the rubber mold that receives the wax, now the ceramic shell is going to receive the metal. Okay, this is pouring the molten metal. This happens to be bronze. We can pour the sculptures in Sculpture Milwaukee. We have aluminums, we have stainless, and we have bronze. Aluminum is poured colder, bronze is medium, about 2050, and stainless is poured at about 2500. These are, again, the investments. The metal's poured, it's cool. You break the investment off with a hammer. So for every bronze, like I said before, you have to have a wax. You have one rubber mold, that's how you make an addition. That's how you have a limited edition of bronzes. But each time you make that bronze, you have to make it again with the ceramic shell. So people think that if you have a mold, I don't know, they get this idea that you're saving time. But if you make one bronze or you make 30 bronzes, it's the same amount of work. It's the same amount of labor. The only thing you're saving is that rubber mold in front. Okay, this is the welding and the metal finishing. Again, the artist can come in at this phase. So when the pieces get all welded back together, you're going to have weld marks, you're going to have marks from the cup and the screws and the gates. There's a lot of scarring on the surface. There might be metal defects from shrinking. So all that has to be cleaned up. So it has to be welded, filled in, carved back. And then this is the time where the artisans in the studio or the artists that work for us have to understand how that sculpture was made in the artist studio. The artists use clay, they use their fingers, they use wood. So if I've got a sculpture in wood, and now I have to repair the wax to make it look like wood, I'm going to get out some wood carving tools and start making marks in that wax. Or I'm going to get out a rotary tool if I get it to cut the wax. So I'm going to try to replicate whatever the artist did in the studio. But it's really important that we know what the mode of production is. And all those signs are in the castings. So if you understand, if you look at something long enough, you can usually figure out what material it was made in. And that just sort of gives you a whole other story to the work. Okay, this is the final phase. This is the patina. This is a typical two-stage patina. Almost every piece in every museum is going to have patina similar to this, or it's going to have like the dark black brown. Those are very traditional. Today, for centuries, people have been doing other things to bronzes too, such as painting them or leaving them raw. Or you're going to see a lot more. You see a lot of painting in Sculpture Milwaukee. I think the Irwin Worm is painted. That's in aluminum. Kiki Smith is painted. What's the basketball? Yes, that one is painted. So you can't always tell it's a bronze, but you can tell it's a casting. All right, so when I get through Liz, and then if we run out of time, we can talk about the other sculptures when we're down on the other. Okay, so this is Liz Glenn, and the name of this sculpture is Murder with Extended Arm. It's a bronze casting. And artist Liz Glenn and museum conservators and 8 sculptors recast the posthumous Augusta Rodin's in the LA Museum art collection. The performance piece, and Liz is mainly a performance artist. The performance, The Myth of Singularity after Roseanne, is part of a long cycle of performances during which time Lynn focused on different monumental artworks on display on the museum's campus. Lynn and her assistants collaged and reconfigured plaster casts taken from the molds to make new sculpture works that would later be cast into bronze. So as you might imagine, the museum conservators were pretty nervous about this project until they ran some tests with the artists to make sure that the patinas wouldn't damage the bronzes. They had to pull molds from the posthumous bronzes at the museum. Even though the bronzes were cast in the 60s, they were outdoors and exposed to the elements, the conservators would not be satisfied until those tests were successfully conducted. So they pulled molds with the silicone, specifically Smooth On Rebound 25, and they didn't damage the patinas. So they were able to continue to pull molds from the bronzes. So here's a picture of Liz, and she's pulling a silicone mold from the face. And what they did was they took all different small pieces from the different bronzes in the Bergers of Calais, and then they cast plasters. Here she has her 8 assistants making molds, I think in the background there. You can see them assembling the plasters. So they did sculptures like this where they, and it took 2 days to build these 8 plaster sculptures. And she never meant them to be cast into bronze, and I never did really find what made her decide to do that. But she took the plasters, and okay, now this is where I was completely stumped. Like, I kept staring at this sculpture, and I kept staring at it, and I kept thinking, how did they do this? Did they take these like fragmented molds to the foundry and like paint wax on them and then try to assemble them together? And I kept scratching my head and I couldn't find an addition number, so I thought, oh my God, she just like, I couldn't find a foundry. Did they just cobble this together like in a university foundry somewhere? I know, how did they do this? And I just kept scratching my head, and I just didn't want to believe that they actually took these full-scale sculptures, like that, for instance, took them to the foundries and invested the money and invested the time to make the molds of these entire pieces. Well, lo and behold, they did. And so what they did, it took 2 days to make the plasters. It took 9 days, 9 months to make the bronzes of the foundry. So the moral of that story is kind of when you're looking at something and all the clues are there, you can pretty much believe what you see. I don't know why I was just really stumped by these, but I think they're really fabulous, and it was really an amazing feat. So I think this one will be really fun to talk about, because when you look at this piece, you can see all the patches. They made these plaster pieces. So I'm starting to ramble. They made these plaster pieces, and they cobbled them together, and then they took burlap and plaster wrap, and they just patched everything together. And so when they made the molds and made the bronzes, all of that like patching and cobbling and lively sort of activating the surface all came out of the bronzes. And she said that she really wanted the bronzes to reflect Rodin's original pre-post-posthumous bronzes. She wanted them to be lively, and she wanted them to have these beautiful patinas. I don't think she succeeded with the patinas. However, the activation of the surface is where they really come to life. So, you know, if we're down there, when you look at that piece, you can think about those things. So how am I doing that time? I can go through the other ones pretty quick. Yeah, I'm not going to say too much, but okay. Yeah, here's all of the pieces in an exhibition. I can say a lot of things I want to say about that. So Kiki Smith, she's really kind of like the queen of wax. I mean, that woman is she really has mastered that medium. And in an interview with Chuck Close, she said bronze is a dead material, so you have to have some kind of texture to make it live. And she was the kind of person that's she's cast at a lot of foundries. She cast at Walla Walla, she cast at Johnson Atelier, she now casts at Tala. These are all like the premier art foundries in the country. She's cast at all of them. She's had a long career. A lot of them have gone out of business. But this picture on the right, so you see her in her studio. I'm thinking those aren't like solid wax. They're probably carved out of foam and then coated with wax. And she really loves the wax because it's so visceral and because it's so direct. And when you look at all of her bronzes, you can see the wax, you can see the hand, you can see how she has mastered that material in an expressive, almost, I'm going to say, expressionist kind of a format. She works the wax with brushes, and she builds it, and she folds it, and she just gives it a lot of character. So it's a piece on the right which is really a tour de force when it comes to casting and waxes. I don't even know how they did it. I mean, it's just amazing. But all those floral arrangements around there, all those, she probably has little molds, she casts them all, and then she just starts to construct, she just starts to build up. Wax is a really difficult material to work in, so, you know, she's sort of taken it to a whole other level. So when you look at the piece Sear, go to the next one, she's kind of obscuring her process a little bit here because she's painted the bronze. So she's kind of gone from, you know, having the raw wax medium be like the star of the show, and then, you know, bringing everything down to this quiet, floating, you know, Alice in Wonderland piece. But if you look at that piece, you get up close to that piece, you can still see all that information is there. From a distance, you know, you can see all of this texture here, and all of that is Kiki working with wax. She probably did it mostly in her original, and then they make molds. She probably doesn't do a lot to this one, because as you can see, there's really nothing about that piece that needs the artist to come in and do something to it every time. You know, so I expect that if she's running an edition of this one, each one will be the same as the one before. Unlike her medical waxes that were more like wax museum works, those had more individual kind of qualities of them. So all of these artists have studio assistants. They collaborate with their studio assistants. They have a team. They have a foundry. They have a lot of people working for them. None of this happens in a vacuum. All of this work is way too labor intensive, and you know, just takes too much time. The artist needs to be creating. They need to have that team there to help them get these things accomplished. And I think a lot of people, like there are so many performance people in the show, people that do performance and more conceptual work, and they're all casting bronzes. Well, you can't really get that more conceptual work out unless you give it a hard form. And it's just really interesting to me to see all these really conceptual people working in casting, because they do things that are just totally out of the box and really make it exciting and really make it a challenge for their fabricators, because they're always coming up with things that you're going like, what? You know, like, you know, so it's really, I guess it's what makes my job interesting. This is one of my kind of favorite pieces just because there's a lot of humor here. When I stared at this piece for a long time before I realized it was made out of aluminum baking pans initially. And so, you know, it's really hard to find information on how artists make things. They kind of hide it, or they don't want it out there, or it's not cool, or, you know, it's just, you know, it's not important to the end result. So sometimes it's really hard to find any pictures of people working in their studios, any evidence to collaboration or studio assistants or anything like that. So I dig until I can find it. So this is a different piece, but this is a peeing man and circle ants. All made in the same foundry as Hazmat Love is made, all made with aluminum baking pans, the same process. And this is the studio assistant, Unji, and who's an artist, and it's not unusual for an art foundry employee to be an artist. And according to the website, he's working on his favorite artist, Tom Friedman's piece. He welds, chases, and polishes. He has a lot of patience for this because stainless is extremely labor-intensive material. It's hard, it's slow to work, it's hard to polish, and that's why you don't see a lot of it. Once at the foundry, I don't think he's probably very involved with these works because they are pretty much finished when they leave the studio. And they have really interesting surfaces, and they're very challenging pieces, and the artist probably doesn't even know how to do that type of work. We're almost done. Magdalena Abakanowitz, group of 5. She claims that each of her pieces are unique. These are bronze castings. She also does iron. Her early work was made from fiber, burlap sacks, and crude materials that she could get in Soviet Poland at the time. And she impregnates it with resin to make these forms, and she still makes her forms the same way today. But she started casting in the 80s and 90s, and these pieces on Wisconsin Avenue have absolutely beautiful finishes on them. So I think that she did these in lost wax, because the reproduction of those fiber surfaces are just like exquisite. So when you go and look at those, you can look and see every beautiful little detail of that fiber. It's also very expensive to do little large-scale pieces like that in lost wax. You saw how much labor there is for the next thing. So she has this piece in Chicago. She does work really monumentally, and this is the Agora in cast iron. Each one of those, there's 106. And I'm only going to talk about this because it just kind of helps support what you're seeing in Sculpture Milwaukee. 106 pieces cast in an industrial foundry, 9 feet tall, 1,100 pounds each. So, I mean, this is a massive, massive undertaking. You're going to be hard-pressed to find any art foundry in the country that can do this. So where do you go? So you have a project of this scale, you have to go and partner with an industrial foundry that casts, has 10-ton gray iron furnaces, right? So they can, like somebody like Kohler can do this. These pieces are a lot cruder, they're cast in sand, they have a whole different quality, they're rusting, they don't have a patina, they're not waxed, they're, the elements are changing them as time goes on. And, but that collaboration with industrial is very common for artists when they get to this scale. But it's a whole other kind of relationship or collaboration, because those industries aren't used to working with artists. That's why we have art founders. If a very conceptual artist shows up in a place like this, they'll probably send Mike. So, let's see what else we have left. I only have 2 more. So, Johan Pote, he's broadly a conceptual artist, working in a variety of materials. You look at this piece, it's a suitcase, it's his suitcase, cast in bronze. And you might think, well, that's a pretty simple process, right? This guy's lazy, you just take the suitcase and cast it in bronze. Well, actually, for the foundry, that's a kick in the butt, because you're going to bring in a suitcase, it's flopping all over the place, it's some kind of material, you're not sure if it's going to be able to react with the mold materials or not. It's a skinny lid, and you got to get wax in the mold. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy things about casting an object like this. But of course, a conceptual artist, they don't care. So they're just going to bring in there to say, and then you're going to make a lot of noises about it, and you're going to do it, and then it's going to turn out great, like this piece. Now, it's real possible, this guy's, he does a lot of crazy stuff, so he could be making his own molds. He could be making his own waxes. A lot of these artists, especially if they're not if they're used to working in a lot of different materials, they'll take that challenge on. Like, I can figure out how to make a mold, and I can get somebody to help me do this, and they can really get far, especially if they've got, just like this piece was a suitcase actually before, I think it was commissioned for Sculpture Milwaukee, right? I mean, it wasn't in bronze, I'll think before. And then when it came here, it was bronze. So anyways, these people, they tend to push us to new levels, and everyone learns something new. Okay, last, no, not quite last. This is a cast aluminum. It's an addition, and I was trying to figure out, because a lot of these pieces aren't marked as addition numbers, so I don't know if they're a one-up, I don't know if they're an addition, I don't know, a lot of things about them. This is a lot more difficult piece to make than meets the eye. I think it was probably an enlargement, and what the artist would do for an enlargement is, he could have enlarged his own pieces, because here you can see him working on some plaster in the studio. This is the only picture I can find of him working. Well, we do know he's working in the studio. We do know from this he has studio assistants. But what he might do for something like Half Big Suit is make an 18-inch model out of plaster. Send that off to the digital enlarger. They'll do a scan of it. Then that scan will be cut with a 7-axis CNC robot to make a core or make like your basic proportion. And then that will go to either back to his studio where he'll surface it with who knows what, mold coat, theater materials, maybe wax, maybe an oil clay, and get it ready to go to the foundry. So that's kind of how I think this one might have been made. So this is British artist Gary, who he's a painter, basically, and he once said that he couldn't make sculpture because he had very bad understanding of gravity, and they all fall over. And so these two bronze sculptures, Bud and Snowman, we have Bud here on Sculpture Milwaukee, and I thought I'd show the Snowman too, because neither defy gravity. So I just thought they were kind of funny. He uses just a traditional brown patina, so looking at this, it doesn't really give you a lot of information. It's really just about the form. It sort of relates to his paintings. It's something that he could make and send off to the foundry, and they could make 100 of them. He doesn't need to be there. It says everything he wants it to say. And if you look at it, you won't see any clues about the process. Anyway, so now that I filled your heads with information, go out, use your power of observation, enjoy sculpture, look past the historical baggage of bronze casting and metal casting in general. Be a detective and find out what you can learn about making sculpture.
Thank you.